Charlie, to be here, and it's my first opportunity and try at doing one of these presentations with you, and like I said, very excited to showcase some of Atlantic Canada, is what we call it here on the far eastern part of Canada. And for those that aren't familiar, Canada is certainly a big country, and a lot of times for our Australian market, they know a lot about Alberta and BC, but not as much about the rest of Canada. So my purpose tonight is to cover the three maritime provinces, is what we refer to the Atlantic Maritimes Tour. It covers Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Canada's smallest province, Prince Edward Island. And at some time down the road in February, we're going to be covering Newfoundland and Labrador, which is the most easterly province in Canada. But this touring program is one of our signature programs covering all three of the provinces that I mentioned. And one of the things I always like to start off with is to talk about our itineraries. And the Atlantic Maritimes itinerary is a 13-day program. But when we built this program, we recognized that if you come from Australia, you have a lot more time and you want to see more. So we took what was a week-long tour and made it more comprehensive into 2 weeks, and then divided in half into two segments. So if you ever have clients that don't have time to do a longer program, we do have two great week-long tours. And when you combine these two tours, they become the 13-day tour. So we have a week-long Bay of Fundy tour and a week-long tour that we call the Enchanting Islands. And I'll explain that as we continue through the program. But we always like to talk about Atlantic Tours. We are a company that's located here in Atlantic Canada. Our offices are located in Nova Scotia, and our tour managers all live here and work here, and so they bring that aspect to all of our touring programs. And with that said, it's nice to have someone on the ground to do those kind of things. And of course, the first day of our program does not have anything included except for the overnight and the welcome reception that evening, that once again is not even mandatory. And that's pretty standard for all of our programs, because depending on where you're coming from in the world, basically we just make this an arrival day. The purpose of the reception is a chance to meet fellow travelers and to learn a little bit about what's happening the next few days. But once again, if you arrive later than the reception, then basically all the information is provided for the next morning when you'll actually begin the tour and get to know your other traveling companions. With that said, all of our programs once again begin in the capital city of Nova Scotia, which is Halifax. We're blessed to have a beautiful harbor, the second largest natural harbor in the world after Sydney, Australia. Ice-free year-round, and what you're seeing in the picture is our waterfront area where the boardwalk transitions from the casino on one end to the cruise ship here on the other end. And from a walkability standpoint, I always say the magic thing in Halifax is 20 minutes. It takes 20 minutes to get just about anywhere in our downtown core. Halifax itself is a peninsula, so the space that we have on the peninsula is somewhat limited. In the downtown core, you can easily get anywhere. It's within a 20-minute walk. And if you were driving yourselves, I said off the peninsula to anywhere else in the Halifax area, it's about a 20-minute drive. So 20 minutes is that magic number. The other thing I should mention, you're getting a view here now of our port city in the downtown core that I'm talking about, and the boardwalk that runs along the waterfront. But in the background, you'll see a beautiful green space. That's Citadel Hill. And Halifax is built on a drumlin, a hill. And so I always say we do the zigzag here. When you're walking from the waterfront to the top of Citadel Hill, you would go down a street, up a street, down a street, up a street, until you get there to save yourself the climb to the top of the hill. But once again, a 20-minute walk. And our hotel is located, our partner hotel on our programs is the Cambridge Suites Hotel in the heart of downtown Halifax. The other thing that you may want to look at if you're bringing guests here is that first day, like I said, is an arrival day. We do not include Halifax City Tour or any of that stuff as part of our touring program. So anyone that wants to include that would need to add a pre or a post night to actually immerse themselves in the city unless they arrive early enough on the arrival day to include some of it. So that's just good to keep in mind for anyone that you're selling a program. We always do that as an add-on as opposed to including it. Now our tour managers will always do a part of a city tour coming and going from the city, but if you want to immerse and go into some of our beautiful museums like the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic or Pier 21 or Immigration Shed, or include time at Citadel Hill, the fortification, then you would need to add extra time for that. The town clock that you see there is one of the iconic landmarks of Halifax. It was brought here by Prince Edward, Duke of Kent, which is Queen Victoria's father, and he thought we were all tardy. He brought it here in 1803, and it's been running ever since. Another one of our great hotels, and a sister hotel to the property we use, is the Prince George Hotel, which you can see the sign there. And that on the right-hand side is our current Scotiabank Center, where major concerts and conventions and that kind of thing are held. Once again, another view from Citadel Hill looking down towards the waterfront and our beautiful public gardens. Once again, from our hotel, this would be about a 10-minute walk or about a 20-minute walk from the waterfront. And we have over 17 acres of beautiful gardens in the heart of our city where you can go and have some lunch or just sit on the bench and watch the world go by or people watch. Day 2, which would be our first official day of touring, we'll actually get up in the morning. Breakfast is included at the hotel. It's a deluxe continental, and we'll leave Halifax and travel towards New Brunswick, where we're going to visit some nice attractions and eventually end with a beautiful lobster dinner. So what you're seeing here is our stop in the morning. It's the UNESCO World Heritage Site of Joggins, and Joggins is located on the Bay of Fundy. And the first half of this tour concentrates on the Bay of Fundy, everything Bay of Fundy. And for those that aren't familiar, the Bay of Fundy is where we have the world's highest tides. The difference between a low and a high tide of nearly 18 meters, or about 54 feet. And here you walk on the ocean floor, and you actually, why it's the UNESCO World Heritage Site, this is where a lot of the great fossils are located. So you'll be walking on fossils, holding in your hand fossils, and the interpreters will go over all of that with you, but it's a beautiful spot. And from there, we head up to New Brunswick, where we go to out on a lobster boat, where we actually haul up lobster traps and eat our lobster dinner right on the boat. And the lobster is served Acadian style here, and what that means is you'll have rolls and all of that other stuff, but your lobster is actually served cold. Our Acadians, our French descendants, believed that was the best way to eat lobster. So there's a couple opportunities on our program to have lobster, and this is your opportunity to try lobster the Acadian style cold. And the Acadians, the French people, were the ones that first came to North America to set up a community. They came in 1604, so the French came first, and they settled in Nova Scotia. And then you didn't have the English come until 1607, and they went down to Virginia in the U.S. and started their first colony. And you'll hear all about the wonderful history, the early history of Canada outside of the indigenous people. The Mi'kmaq people were, of course, the French and the English, and you'll hear about how the land changed hands 7 rotations or 14 times, and about all the good and bad that went on during those periods of time when our managers share that history with you. After our lobster dinner, we check into the Crown Plaza Hotel in the bilingual city of Moncton. And then like I said, we overnight there. So we've included that day breakfast, lunch, and dinner, because we also include lunch at the UNESCO World Heritage Site. After the next morning, we once again include breakfast, and a breakfast is included every day on our programs. We head along the Bay of Fundy on the New Brunswick side, and our first stop is at Hopewell Cape. And Hopewell Cape is a spot where you can walk on the ocean floor. What we call these is the giant flower pot rocks, and this is during low tide, so you can walk around. And the next slide will show you the tide starting to come in, and then a little bit later, we're nearly at high tide where you can kayak or boat. So it's a great chance to actually see the Bay of Fundy and to once again visit the park and learn all about our tides and the life that that is in the Bay of Fundy. It's one of the best feeding grounds in North America, so there's lots of fish that you can catch in the Bay of Fundy, and it's famous for our lobster and our scallops and so many of other delicacies that people come here to enjoy. And we continue along the Bay of Fundy through Fundy National Park, and then end up eventually in the port city of St. John. St. John, New Brunswick is located on the Bay of Fundy, and we do a 2-night stay at the Hilton Hotel right on the St. John waterfront. One of the things you're going to have here is a city tour of St. John, which will include a stop at Reversing Falls. The St. John River, one of the longest rivers, empties into the Bay of Fundy. And what happens at this bridge is there's a huge gorge of about 18 feet. But there's also a tidal change here of 18 feet. So during a low tide, the water from the river empties into the Bay of Fundy, and of course during high tide, the water pushes back up that river another 18 feet. So you've got a 36-foot difference between a low and a high tide in this river, and of course the water in the river reverses. So that's why we call it Reversing Falls. So during our 2-day stay there, we always have a chance to see a low and a high tide so they can see the great difference. And what you're seeing right now is a Reversing Falls. The water is being pushed up the river. The next day, on our second day of being in St. John, we do a day trip down to the beautiful community of St. Andrews by the Sea, where we do a whale watching boat tour. And the whale watching boat tour that you're seeing here is our provider, Quaddy Lynx. It's a catamaran-style boat where we get out in the Bay of Fundy. And the Bay of Fundy is the feeding ground for the North American right whale, the endangered right whale, where there's less than 500 left in the world. And once again, other whales like the humpback. So it's a great opportunity, but it's also a beautiful opportunity to look back at the scenic community of St. Andrews. You'll see seabirds and perhaps some of the other boats and such coming to and from the harbor. This is the waterfront area of St. Andrews with the shops and where the whale watching happens. And we have a free afternoon to explore in this town after we have an included lunch. And of course, one of the spots that people like to wander through is perhaps the Algonquin Resort. That's a great spot to go have a beverage, or just it towers over the community. A beautiful property. It's a Marriott Autograph property. And one of the other things you might want to do is visit the beautiful Kingsbrae Gardens, which pays tribute to flowers and fauna from Atlantic Canada. And or you can do the shops or the historic waterfront. We go back to St. John for our last overnight in New Brunswick before we cross the Bay of Fundy by ferry. And when we cross the Bay of Fundy, we end up in the town of Digby, and we stay overnight at the beautiful Digby Pines Resort. And the waterfront of the Digby area you're seeing here in this view with the fishing boats, but Digby is known for the largest scallop fleet in the world. So they're famous for the Digby scallop. So it's a great opportunity if you've not had a scallop at this point, some great Digby scallops, and we don't need to complicate our seafood here. It's beautiful. You don't need a lot more than wine and butter to make it wonderful. Another view of the Digby waterfront with the buildings in the background, so you can stroll through town. There's some free time for that, or you can spend some time here at the resort. This is the Digby Pines Resort overlooking the Bay of Fundy, a great opportunity for you to see the changing tides, or you might want to try to fit in a game of golf while you're there as well. They have a golf course on property and shuttles that will run you there. We include a nice dinner at leisure here, and at breakfast you just order from the menu an appetizer or two, main entree, dessert, and like I said, it's that menu. What we do from there is we travel along the beautiful Annapolis Valley, and the Annapolis Valley is where I was born and raised, and it's on the Nova Scotia side of the Bay of Fundy. And we're going to, our first stop is going to be at the Grand Pre National Historic Site, and now become a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And it tells the story of the Acadian people. We visit one of our local wineries. This area was famous for apple orchards, and in the last 30 years we've decided that we're on the same line of latitude as a lot of the great wine growing areas of Europe, and have started growing wine, good quality wine, and it's an opportunity for your guests to try that. This particular view you have here is a view from my mom's house. It's absolutely beautiful. The church that you see is part of the Grand Pre National Historic Site in the Bay of Fundy in the background. The beautiful mountainside that you see there is the Cape Blomidon, and the flat land that you're seeing towards Cape Blomidon is the Dyke land, and that's the reason for it being a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Those lands were claimed from the Bay of Fundy by the French people when they came here in the early 1600s, and they still are functioning dikes today, and that's why it has its UNESCO designation. But this historic site pays tribute to the deportation of our French people. Back in 1755, our governor of the time, war was going on between France and England, and as I said, this land was being handed back and forth. And during this period of time, the governor decided the French people should sign an oath of allegiance to the British Crown. They didn't want to do that against their French country, even though they had been here for years and really had not a big connection to France. They still didn't want to sign an oath of allegiance. So in 1755, the governor had a decree, and the deportation of the French people happened from here, and a lot of them ended up down in Louisiana. We know them today as Cajuns, and eventually made their way back to Nova Scotia many years later, but this land had been then given to New England planters to come here and plant New England. So much of this land became English as opposed to French. And there's a lot more to the story, why Halifax was founded, and all of that plays part in this story. Another view of the church and the statue of Evangeline, and Evangeline tells of how families were torn apart, and this beautiful young girl was torn away from her lover, and it really follows the epic poem by Longfellow of Evangeline, sort of the story of the Acadian French people. A view from one of the vineyards towards the Bay of Fundy, and then we end up back in Halifax for our overnight. So if you're doing the Bay of Fundy portion of the trip, after your overnight, then you would fly home. If you're continuing on the trip, then you would do the Enchanting Islands. This would be the arrival day for the Enchanting Islands, and once again, nothing included for you but your overnight at the hotel and a reception in the evening. The guests that are continuing on the tour are welcome to join and get to know their new guests at the reception, or they can do their own thing because now they've been introduced to Halifax and they may want to go out and enjoy some of the nightlife because we are a pub city, a youthful city. We have a lot of universities and a lot of fun things to do in the evening. Once again, like I said, it's a free night on their own. The next morning, we have you can go for a breakfast, but we're going to go out for breakfast. And what we're doing is traveling to beautiful Peggy's Cove. And what you're seeing here in the picture is the lighthouse at Peggy's Cove. Peggy's Cove Lighthouse is one of the most photographed lighthouses in North America. And the cove itself has a population of about 60 people, but on a busy summer day or fall day, it can have 2 or 3, 4 or 5,000 people come visit this community. But we go there for breakfast when you see it just like you do in this picture. And as we're leaving after breakfast is when all of the cruise ship passengers and tourists start coming into the community. And that's our reasoning for going and having a lovely breakfast in beautiful Peggy's Cove. Here's a picture of the cove itself with the beautiful red boat and the little entrance in from St. Margaret's Bay. It's a great chance to have fish cakes for breakfast or baked beans or anything that you should want to have in regard to eggs or any of the other goodies that you want for breakfast. Another view of Peggy's Cove and how it's solid barrens, solid bedrock. Nothing grows here on the rock, so they have to bring a little soil in to have grass. And from Peggy's Cove, we head down to what we call the South Shore, the Western Shore, and that is Lunenburg that you're seeing there, and it's a UNESCO World Heritage town because of the original buildings that are located there. And this village pays tribute to our seafaring heritage. A lot of the great famous schooners in the world were built here, like the one on our 10-cent piece, the Blue Nose, and it's a great souvenir just in itself to take home. And the red building that you see here is the Fisheries Museum of the Atlantic. In the background, you'll see a big building on the hillside. When we arrive in Lunenburg, the first thing we do is get off at this old school, which is now being converted into a multi-use building, a performing arts center, but we begin a walking tour of the town here, the historic UNESCO town of about a 30-minute walk, and we walk downhill and end at the Fisheries Museum, the red building that you saw earlier, where we can visit the Fisheries Museum, you can wander the waterfront, have some lunch at the many restaurants, and here's the colorful town, the beautiful bright colored buildings, and truly a gem that we have here in Nova Scotia. There's the famous schooner that I mentioned, the Bluenose 2, and its home berth is located in Lunenburg. There is an auxiliary berth in Halifax, and generally the opportunity is there. If it's in town, you could go out sailing on the Bluenose for an additional cost. We leave Lunenburg and go to the beautiful community of Mahone Bay, which is famous for the churches. There's actually 5 churches in Mahone Bay, and once again, a very arts and crafts-oriented time. We get some free time to wander through Mahone Bay before checking into our hotel, which is about 15 minutes drive from Mahone Bay on the western shore at Oak Island. Oak Island Inn and Marina, and of course Oak Island is the story of all the treasure hunters during the rum running days, and you'll get to learn all about that. The next day we leave Oak Island, where we have an Oak Island Resort. We have an included dinner. We'll have breakfast there again, and we'll head towards Prince Edward Island. And our first stop is to learn about our Mi'kmaq people, our indigenous people, and we have a nice visit to their museum, and you'll learn perhaps how to drum or the arts and crafts, but you'll learn all about our Mi'kmaq. And then we head to beautiful Prince Edward Island, Canada's smallest province, the province without any rock. They actually have to import rock to make roads. I always call it our patchwork quilt of rolling farm country. There's 1.5 million acres, and 1 million of it's farmed. Beautiful beaches, red sand, and then we have the 13-kilometer bridge that takes us over to Prince Edward Island. You're seeing one of the wonders here, the bridge itself. And this is what the island looks like. It's rolling hills, beautiful water vistas, and of course, famous for that red soil, famous for growing potatoes. And what you're seeing there is the beautiful lupins. June is the time for our lupins. So if guests come in June, there are fields and fields with beautiful lupins. One of the things that we include while we're in Prince Edward Island is we go to the musical Anne of Green Gables. The author, Lucy Maud Montgomery, who wrote all of those famous stories, is from Prince Edward Island, born in Prince Edward Island, went to university in Nova Scotia, but this musical has been running ever since 1967, and it's world-class theater. If we happen to be there at a time when it's not running, there's usually an alternate show, and we would include that as well if it's not available. While we're in Prince Edward Island, there is a free morning where we have a walking tour if you want to go on it. It is your free morning. You don't have to, but we include a walking tour with the Confederation players. And then we go out and we actually tour more of the island. So what you're seeing here is the home of Anne of Green Gables, the storybook version. This is our National Historic Site and one of our national parks. So you'll learn all about the story of Anne here at the site. There's Anne herself, and then we visit Canada's smallest national park, Prince Edward Island National Park, and the Cavendish Beach area, where we'll actually allow you to, or give you time to go out and stick your foot in the water if you want, walk on the beach, and visit Canada's smallest national park. And then that evening we go and do a beautiful lobster dinner, the other style, the hot lobster dinner with all-you-can-eat mussels and fresh-made rolls and fresh-made pies and dessert, and you can have as many desserts as you want. So lots of opportunity to eat and, once again, have lobster, which a lot of people come here for. Then back to your hotel. We stay in the heart of Charlottetown at the Rod Charlottetown Hotel, within the walking distance of all the downtown, right in the heart of downtown. And you're talking about a province where you can drive an hour each direction and cover the province in about 15 minutes across the croissant. I always say Prince Edward Island looks like a croissant, and we're located in the capital city of Charlottetown. The whole island only has a population of 150,000, and the capital city about 40,000. So it's really a small town, easy walkability, and a great spot to explore. We leave Prince Edward Island not by bridge but by boat because we want to give you that feel of it being an island, so we cross back to Nova Scotia and head to beautiful Cape Breton Island. And we stay in the town of Baddeck, and Baddeck is famous for being the home of Alexander Graham Bell. And a lot of people know Alexander Graham Bell for the phone, but he was an avid explorer and inventor. He did a lot with early flight. He did a lot with hydrofoils, and that's his home that you see in the background. And we stayed 2 nights in the town of Baddeck. There's the Alexander Graham Bell Museum that we include. And then we, and the nice thing about the museum, it pays tribute to, the phone is only a very small part of the museum. You're seeing early flight here, and we have a great guide that takes us through this museum. And once again, if you want to stay on longer, the museum is about a 15-minute walk from the hotel, and the town of Baddeck is a beautiful community of about 400 people. The next day is a full day of the world-famous Cabot Trail, and the Cabot Trail is one of the most scenic highways in the world. And of course, Cape Breton Island is the island portion of Nova Scotia where the Cabot Trail is located. It takes us a full day of winding through the mountains with the beautiful ocean views, and we actually go and do a whale watch tour. Once again, one more chance to see whales, and of course, visit Cape Breton Highlands National Park. We stop in the morning at one of the famous hookers, one of the rug hookers of Shetty Camp, and this is an Acadian community that does this world-class rug hooking. So we stop at a museum, and it's also a chance for you to shop at a gift store that's all locally made stuff. We come back to the Inverary Inn, where we include both dinners, both evenings, for a finale dinner, because this will be our last night together. And then this last day, as we head back to Halifax, we go to Fortress Louisbourg and visit the French fortress that was started back in the early 1720s. And 1/5 of this town has been reconstructed. It's fully animated, and we spend a morning here exploring the French fortress of Louisbourg. You can see some of the animators, and we include lunch there before we return back to Halifax for our final night at the Cambridge Suites Hotel before everyone flies home. And that took me 30 minutes, Charlie. So I'm completed, and if we have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Perfect. Thanks, Richard. Thank you so much.
Hopefully I didn't go over too long.
No, that's perfect and absolutely fascinating. Wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. I'm sure everybody's taken a lot from that. So, ladies, the floor is open for questions. Just type them into the chat box if you have any questions. So, Richard,
the other thing while they're doing that is that I'd like to also mention that we're experts in customization. So if you ever have clients that don't want to be part of an escorted tour, we can custom make the tours for them as a self-drive. And one of the things to keep in mind, what has taken off like gangbusters is a lot of people come and do this exact tour as a self-drive. In the old days, we used to create a separate catalog for self-drives, but we find there wasn't enough structure there. So a lot of people will come and do this tour as a self-drive, but now we find they even mirror the date of our escorted departure, because then they have someone from the company at the hotel every night should they have questions. So that's become quite popular. And we also do a lot of customized group packages as well as the self-drive. So if you have a small group of 10 or even 20, 30 people, we will tailor and make a program for them. And the other thing that I want to throw in about this longer itinerary, there are many people that are doing a national visit to Canada when they come from Australia, and they may not even have a full week here. So you can even buy components of this trip, like just the Cape Breton tour or just the Prince Edward Island tour, and those are all available in our programming. So if they only want to do 2, 3, 4, 5 days, those are all possible, and we've tried to be the experts in taking a structured program and make it customizable.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, obviously super helpful for everybody who's building itineraries. And of course, so you can buy your products through many of the Australian wholesalers. That's right, isn't it, Richard?
They sure can. It's listed here. There's our contact information, but all of our Australian wholesalers, and there's a number of them that carry our programming either either they're buying into our programming and a partner with us, or we have customized a program for their company, and it may look a little different than this tour, but we have a number of companies that we work with over there from building, we're the background to their programs, and they're using us locally. So there's a number of partners there. If you have any questions, there's our reservations for any of our wholesalers, or anyone that needs to contact us, reservations@atlantictourist.com, and we'll get back to you very quickly with any answers to your questions.
Thank you. So do the tours run year-round, or and also what would you say is the best time of year to go? Always a tricky question, I know.
Well, our tours begin late May, early June, depending on the year, and they run until mid-October. Like our last tour is completed for the year, but the weather is still quite beautiful here. But everyone always looks at us compared to New England and the U.S., and we're, in fact, stuck out in the water more, so our season really runs a little bit longer. But all of our tours are, I would say, late May, early June, up until mid-October is a great time to come. And really, we don't have a big seasonality factor, so I always say if it fits your time frame, any of those times are good. If you come in May, early June, it's going to be cooler. But I always say when you come to Canada, you should always dress like an onion anyway. So layers is what I always recommend. Once again, in the fall, you know, our days will be hot, but our nights will drop down close to freezing, the same as in the spring. Now, in the summer, we can have really hot spells that, and when I say for us, it's nothing in comparison to you. You know, a hot day in August here might be 26 or 27 Celsius, maybe at the most 30, but that's very rare. Our average days are around 20, 21, and our evenings drop down to 12 to 15, with the exception of the shoulder seasons. As far as spring can be a little bit wetter, but our falls tend to be beautiful sunny days with less precipitation. August is drier than July. So, but here we can have fog roll in, so even a hot day can turn into a cool night when that fog rolls in.
Great, thank you. So many good tips there. Kirsten has a question. Hi, Richard. Can the tour be adjusted for families? Are there hotel options that can accommodate 2 adults, 3 children with interconnecting rooms or with larger rooms?
There are a combination of that. Most of the hotels would have connecting rooms, but if they're thinking of going on the escorted, we discourage anyone under 12 on an escorted tour because of the nature of our touring products. But from a self-drive perspective or a customized perspective, anything is possible. We have a lot of you know, opportunities to do smaller properties, bed and breakfast at that level, but all of our hotels would have adjoining rooms, and some would even have cottages on site. If you look at the Digby Pines, for example, there are about 30 cottages on that property, so you don't have to stay in the main lodge. In Cape Breton, the Inverary Resort, once again, has a variety of accommodations on the property. So, you know, we're in small communities. A lot of our properties are seasonal properties with the exception of the big cities. So, you know, their season, they won't even open up until May, and they'll close their properties mid-October.
Lovely, thank you. Don't think there's any other questions, so what we'll do there is sign off. Richard and I will stay on the line if anybody wants to type in anything else, or we'll hang back and have a chat. But otherwise, Richard, thank you so much again, and thanks, ladies, for joining us this morning. Have a great day.
Thank you all, and thrilled, Charlie, to be trying this for the first time, and you've been a great help, so thank you very much.